Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to our day 2 of Crash Bang Squelch 2021. This is our second event of the day, or the second stream of the day. We're kicking it off with our second scientific stories panel. Yesterday's one was about chemistry. We're back today with From Branches to Bones, which means we're talking about biology. My name's Sam. I'm a medical student at Cambridge. I'm joined today by a group of other Cambridge science students who are here to talk about different aspects of biology, plants, animals, humans, everything in between. Throughout our talk today, if you have any questions, please do send them to us. We have a Google form where you are able to submit any questions. And at the end of the talk, we'll be looking through them and answering any that we get submitted. So, kicking us off today, we've got Aaron, who is going to be talking about leaves and photosynthesis. So, Aaron, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Sam. So, as you all might know, like plants photosynthesize to get their food because they can't eat, and this is a process that's happening throughout the day whenever there's sun available to plants. And this is a very important and instrumental process in helping not only the plants produce food, but also produce oxygen, as you may or may not know. But sometimes photosynthesis can be a very abstract process. Like you look at the leaf and you can't really tell whether the leaf is photosynthesizing or not. So today I'm just going to show you a simple way which you can do it yourself at home, and you can try to figure out how plants are actually photosynthesizing. So Sam, if you could help bring up my video. Sam, could you help? Thank you. Yep. So for this experiment, here are just some of the stuff you need, and it's really simple. So you can find them at home yourself. So for example, you just need some baking soda. You just need a hole puncher. You should remove the bottoms of the hole puncher so it's exposed. And you need some containers. You need a syringe, and you need any type of leaf you can find, though some leaves do work better for this experiment than others. So the first step of what you need to do is you need to take your hole puncher and you need to punch some discs out of your leaves. So when doing this, you should try to avoid some of the major veins in the leaf, which you might be able to see. But otherwise, you can just punch about 8 to 10 discs from your leaf as such. And because if you remove the bottom of your hole puncher, they should just come out to your table in something that looks like this. So as you see here, I have about 8 leaf discs total. So what we need to do next is we need to prepare some water and baking soda. So at this moment, it's a good idea to have a think about what baking soda actually is. So I'll come back to that later, but it might be a good idea to think about what baking soda actually is, as you might have noticed that we use baking soda a lot in our various experiment files, as well as different experiments that we have shown you. So yep, just adding my baking soda to my container. And then after that, giving it a nice stir to ensure that all the baking soda has dissolved. So this is the next step is a little more interesting. So what we're going to do is we want to take out the plunger from the back of the syringe. And after that, we want to fill in all our leaf discs into the syringe. So as such, you can just put them into the syringe, and don't worry, it shouldn't fall out if your syringe tip is small enough. So you can just put all your leaf discs into the syringe, and then you can put your plunger back into the syringe and try to push it as close as possible, but try not to damage the discs. You can leave a bit of air gap, and what you want to do is you want to just suck up the solution of baking soda and water into your syringe. And as you can see, most of the leaves discs now are floating. Like if I turn it upside down, you can see that most of the leaf discs are floating or stuck to the side. So what I'm doing now is I'm covering the tip of the syringe with my thumb to create sort of like a vacuum, and I'm pulling on the back of the syringe. So here's another great moment where you can pause and think about why I'm doing this and what does the vacuum do to the leaf discs. So after a while, you can actually notice that most of the leaf discs are actually sunk to the bottom of the syringe, which is exactly what we want. And next, we can just unplug our syringe and we can let all the leaf discs fall out into our solution of baking soda. And as you can see, most of the leaf discs are also sinking in the solution of baking soda. And what we want to do now is we want to bring this container to a well-lit environment. Outside will be best, but if it's like dark at home, you could just leave it under a strong source of light. And you might want to have a timer ready as well, so you can time this experiment. So I should have a timer in the video soon. Yep. So you can just use any stopwatch, or you can just use your phone or a rough timer. So what we're doing here is we're going to time how long it takes for the leaf discs to rise to the surface of the baking soda solution. So why does this work the way it does? Well, here is a rough cross-section of a leaf, which you might notice under a microscope. So if you notice, leaves are very thin, but if you can actually cut the leaf into two and you can actually look at the cross-section of the leaf, this is something of what you might see. So it's noticed there are a lot of cells in the leaf, but there are large air spaces in the leaf as well. So what happens when we add the baking soda solution is, and when we try to, and then when we use the plunger to like pull air out of, and we use the syringe to pull air out of these air spaces. So when you pull air out of these air spaces, what gets replaced is actually the baking soda solution, as you can see here. So as I mentioned just now, baking soda is actually made of is actually known as something else, which is sodium bicarbonate. So what happens in sodium bicarbonate is that the bicarbonate ions in the solution can actually rearrange themselves to form carbon dioxide, as you can see in the reaction on the right-hand side. So they can undertake this reaction to form carbon dioxide. And as you know, photosynthesis of the when plants photosynthesize, they require carbon dioxide. They take in carbon dioxide. So what happens is that the cells are, in the leaf can take up all these carbon dioxide from the baking soda solution. And as you know, photosynthesis releases oxygen as well. So what happens when the oxygen is released from the cells? Well, unlike carbon dioxide, oxygen is not too soluble in water. Therefore, the oxygen will tend to form many small air bubbles in the middle of the leaf, in these air spaces. And what happens is that these air bubbles will actually cause the whole leaf to float again. So if there's many air bubbles here, as air is lighter than water, so it will cause the entire leaf disc to rise to the surface. So if we go back and check on our leaf disc on our leaf discs, oops. If you can go back and check on our leaf discs, so after about 1 hour, all the leaf discs have actually floated to the top. So this tells us that actually the leaves have actually undergone photosynthesis. So they have risen from the bottom of the container to the top of the container. So as you can see, this takes about 1 hour because photosynthesis is because the amount of time it takes for enough air to form to float the entire leaf disc can be quite a while. But this will change depending on your light conditions as well as this type of plant that you use. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this short little demonstration of how photosynthesis works. And please leave any questions that you have in the description, in the form in the description below. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Aaron. That was really interesting. And yes, just to reinforce what Aaron said, if you do have any questions, please do submit them on our Google form. We'd love to answer as many as we can at the end of the talk. Great, thank you, Aaron. Next up, we have Bryony, who's going to be helping us take a closer look at plants. So, Bryony, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Bryony, I'm a plant scientist, and what I'm going to do for my scientific story is I'm going to show you that actually there's more to some really common plants than might at first meet the eye. And to do that, I'm going to use a microscope. So a microscope is a device that we use for looking at things that are really, really small. And it makes these really small things look bigger so that we can see all the little tiny details that we might otherwise miss. And so what I've done is I've taken a few little things that I found around my garden and put them under my microscope. And I'm going to show you guys what you can see when you look really, really closely. So if we could bring up my video. Perfect. So this is my first specimen, and I'm taking a really, really close-up look at it, and I'm focusing in it so that the picture looks much clearer. So have a good look, and if you can go over to menti.com, I'm going to see if you can have a go at guessing what you think my specimen might be. So I'm just going to, if you just give me a second, I'm going to share my screen so you can see my Menti code. Okay, so if you all go to menti.com and fill in the code that's at the top of my screen here, and if you can tell me what you think is under my microscope. We have a few different options here. So what do you think? We've got a few clues. There's the color, there's the texture, a little bit in the background. So what do you think? What do you think is under my microscope? Oh, we've got one vote already. Someone thinks it's a daisy. We'll just wait a few more seconds to see. Oh, a giraffe. That's an interesting thought. Oh, we have 4 votes for daisy now. Okay, so that's clearly the most popular option. 1 for banana. Oh, a few more for daisy. Okay, daisy is clearly getting the most votes here. Okay, so I'm gonna move away. Move away from the Menti now and back to my video. We can get the video back up. So clearly daisy has won. And if we look at a lower magnification, we can see, yes, it clearly is a daisy. But perhaps you haven't looked at one quite so close before. Now, going back to Menti, I have another question for you. So, looking at this picture I've got for you, how many flowers are there in this specimen that I'm showing you? We stick to the same Menti link. How many flowers are there? Oh, we've already got a couple of votes. Okay, the vote seems quite divided on this one. And I think so. What is a flower? You could think about that. And what have you seen in my images? Okay, looks like 1 flower is winning, but I think 100 is catching up. Okay, so looks like we have most votes for 1. Oh, 100, but 100 is very close behind. So let's take a closer look. If we can get the video back up again, awesome. So actually, it's not 1 flower. We might think it's 1 flower, but if we return back to my really magnified view that I showed you earlier, we can hopefully see it a little bit more closely. So here's that view again. Now I want you to look really closely at all of the individual yellow blobs. So this is the center of the flower. If you look really carefully, on each of the little blobs, we have 5 really tiny petals. So I'm going to highlight them for you so that you can see them clearly. There they are. And there's also this orange blob sticking up in the center. That's the stigma. So that's the part of the plant that's sticking out. And that's what the pollen lands on. And so, yeah, so each of these individual yellow blobs is its own flower. Perhaps not something you've ever really noticed before if you haven't taken a close enough look. So that raises the question, if the little yellow blobs are the flowers, then what are the petals that we're seeing around the outside? Well, that we need to look under the microscope again. And this time I've taken the petals off so that we can get a closer look at them. And as we can see, they're not petals, they're actually flowers again. So the daisy head has two different types of really tiny flowers, and they look completely different. So whereas the yellow flowers all had 5 small symmetrical yellow petals, these petals along the outside, which we call, so all these little flowers are called florets. And these are called the ray florets because they go around the outside, like the rays of sun. And they have one big white petal that's actually multiple petals that are fused together. And again, they have this sticky up bit here. That's the stigma. And daisies are not the only flowers that are like this. The daisy family is really big, and there's lots of common flowers that are what we call composites. So they're made up of lots and lots of tiny flowers. So you might know sunflowers, they're composite flowers, as are dandelions, and also thistles. Here's a sunflower again, and you can see these really, really tiny flowers all in the center with their 5 tiny petals. So next time you go out on a walk and you see some daisies, or you're making daisy chains, have a really close look. See if you can spot these little tiny flowers with their tiny petals and their tiny sticky up stigmas. You don't even need a microscope. You can even use a magnifying glass to take a really good look. So what else can you see about plants when you look at them really closely under a microscope? So I have another specimen that I'm going to show you. So it's a bit blurry to start up with, but we're going to focus in and make the picture really clear. So what do you think it is? It's green. That might give you a clue. Perhaps we can make out a few veins. That might give you another clue. So perhaps you realise this is a leaf, but it's a very special type of leaf. And that's because of some special structures. So I've highlighted them here. They have these spikes on them. Now, these spikes are hairs. Now, we have hairs, obviously. Perhaps due to lockdown, you haven't had yours cut for a really long time. But plants also have hairs, and they have lots of different important functions. Now, these are some hairs that you will probably be familiar with them, but you don't like being familiar with them. So these are a special type of hair. They are stinging hairs. So as we kind of zoom out and see a lower magnified view of the leaf, you might see that you recognize it. So this is the leaf of a stinging nettle. And so stinging nettle leaves are covered in these teeny tiny hairs. And these hairs have chemicals in them, chemicals that are irritable. So when we or some other animal touches the leaf, the sharp tip of these hairs breaks off inside our skin, and it releases all these chemicals that irritate us and cause that horrible stinging sensation. And this is because it's a way for the plants to protect themselves. Because if you're an animal that eats plants and you take a bite out of that, you're going to have a horrible sensation in your mouth, horrible feeling, and you're never going to want to eat it again. But there are other uses of hairs as well. Not all hairs are the same. And so I have another really common specimen that you might be familiar with. And again, we're gonna zoom in, we're gonna focus in, and I want you to pay attention to the very edge of this leaf. Again, you can see these tiny hairs, but these are different. These ones are hooked. So they have a special hooked, barbed shape. And so this plant, you may know from lots of different names. Sometimes it's called sticky weed, goosegrass. And you may know it because if you pick it up, it sticks to your clothing. And that's because of these hooked hairs. So they act a bit like Velcro. They hook into your clothing, and it's completely covered in them, which is why it makes it so sticky to touch. So these are just a couple, a few of the really tiny features of plants that you can see if you look really closely. So I hope you guys, next time you perhaps go on a walk or in your garden, you take a look at the plants and you take a really close look. Maybe get a magnifying glass out, or maybe get your phone on them and you can zoom in. You can get a really close look and see plants are actually more interesting than they might at first appear. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bryony. That was really interesting as well. We've actually had a question about plants that I'm gonna bring Aaron in for, and although I think it was kind of directed at Aaron's talk, I think it'd be interesting to get you to help answer it as well. And that question about Aaron's talk was, does the leaf not die when you cut it up? And although I think that was referring to the kind of discs that Aaron was taking out of leaves earlier, I think it'd be interesting to also know about why, when we take plants out of our garden and put them under the microscope as well, why then, if we're pulling them up out of the ground, do they not die as well?
I think this is a great question. So, like, first of all, we have to try to understand what happens when something dies. So, for example, if like you see like an animal gets eaten by a predator, for example, but not the whole animal gets eaten. So like a bite gets taken out of the animal, but the animal dies. So what's actually happening is that when the animal dies, the animal is made out of like a lot of cells. So we're all made out of cells, like all organisms are made out of cells. And when the animal dies, what happens is that the entire animal is unable to circulate blood in its body to deliver stuff like food, water, and air to its cells. So if you think about it, if like an animal gets bitten and like all the blood starts running out of the animal, there's no more circulatory system to deliver like all these to the various cells in the animal, so the animal ends up dead. But for plants, it's a slightly different story. So for example, what I've been doing in my experiment, when I took out the leaf and I started punching holes in the leaf, was that after I took out the leaves, I actually put the leaves right into the, as you can see, into the solution of the baking soda solution. And so in that solution, there's kind of all the stuff that the cells in that leaf disc kind of need to survive. So there's stuff like carbon dioxide from the solution, you can get water from the solution, and you can get light for the plant to make food. So in that sense, the cells in the leaf disc can actually kind of live on a little longer than when you cut the plant up.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Aaron. I think we're going to move on now. And next up, we're going to be moving away from plants and start talking about organs, moving on to looking at animals and humans. So we've got Sian up next with our organ vest.
Yeah. So hi guys, I'm going to talk about all the different organs that sort of live in your stomach torso area and where they go and what their functions do. So first of all, what is an organ? Well, an organ is a group of tissues that work together to do a specific function in the body. So we're going to start off with one of the most well-known ones, which is the heart. I'm sure you've all heard of your heart. This is a very vital organ, and it lives just here in your rib cage on the left side of your chest. Now, your heart is really important because its main job is to pump your blood around your body. And it's really important that this happens because you need to get all your nutrients to the ends of your fingers and your toes, and it can't happen any other way. So to keep all them cells and them tissues alive, you need to be able to transport all your food and nutrients to them. Fun fact about the heart is that by the time you're 70, it has pumped around 50 Olympic swimming pools worth of blood around your body. The next really vital organ, oh dear, I've lost my heart, is the lungs. So you have two lungs, and they also live in your rib cage, which is this bits of bone here, like this. So the rib cage is also quite an important, or very important, structure because these organs here are very vital to survive. We can't survive without them. So it's really important that we protect them. and this rib cage gives them the protection that they need. The lungs, their main job is to enable you to breathe in oxygen. So the air is full of oxygen, and we need that to help with reactions that happen in our cells to give us energy. And if we don't have oxygen, then we die. We have to have oxygen to survive. So their main job is to act a bit like a big airbag or balloon to an extent and fill up with air so that your blood can come along and pick up all the oxygen from the air and take it off around your body. Next, we're going to look at the digestive system. So if you think about when you eat food, first of all, it will go into your mouth and you'll swallow it. It goes down your esophagus and into the first part, which is your stomach. What's it down? So your stomach is full of stomach acid, and it starts off the digestion process. So when you eat all the yummy food you'll eat for dinner, the molecules in it are quite big. You've got lots of big carbohydrates and fats and proteins, and we can't absorb them straight away. We can't uptake them. So in order to be able to uptake them, we have to break them down into lots of little bits first. And this process sort of happens throughout the whole digestive system, but it starts off in the stomach. Now the stomach's got a lot of acid in it, called stomach acid, and that's really important to study, start the digestion process, and B, to kill off any sort of germs or bacteria or viruses which might make its way in when you're eating. And that acid means that it's killed off so it can't get into your system and make you poorly and ill. The stomach goes just here, below your lungs. The next part of the digestive system are your intestines. There are two types of intestines. You've got your large one, this one here, but before it gets to the large one, the food goes through the small intestine. Now the small intestine is 7 meters long, so really, really long. And to fit it all in, it's all curled up like this, really, really tightly in your body, so we can fit all 7 meters of it into your tummy. The intestines are where the majority of your food is actually absorbed. So it's taken up from inside these tubes and put into the blood, so it can then go around your body, give you energy to do the things that you love to do. And the intestines are found sort of here, in this sort of area of your tummy, stomach. So now we've looked at the lungs and sort of your chest, vital organs, your digestive system. So now I want you to have a think about a particular organ, and the organ I want you to think about is the liver. I don't think it's this colour, roughly, but we'll go with it. So I've got a Menti pole, and I want you to have a go. There's like a little pin thing, and I want you to put the pin where you think the liver goes in your body, and I want you to say what you think the function is. So if I share my screen to one bit. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So that's the Menti number at the top. Oh, the rest is falling off. So if you can go onto that and have a quick think about where you think the liver is, if you just move the pin and put it where you think it is on the body, and then there's a second slide question here as to what the function of the liver is. You just have a go and see. Oh, there we go. We've got some answers coming in. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to talk about a different organ system, which is the renal system. So the renal system consists of, well, mainly your kidneys. You have 2 kidneys. They're found in sort of your lower back, or back areas. They go about here in our organ vest. Now the kidney's job is to filter out the blood. to clean it out and to get rid of anything that shouldn't be there. It also regulates your water. But as you can see, they're quite small. So once it's taken filtered all the stuff out and it produces urine. So once it's produced that urine, there's nowhere for it to go. So what happens is it has to go down the ureter into the bladder. So this goes down here. Here are ureters. So they connect to there's one for each kidney, and then they go down into the bladder. So if you think about when you drink too much water, and then what happens is you end up with lots of water in your blood, and then they'll go into the kidneys, and the kidneys will take out that water, turn it into urine, and it will go down into your bladder. And then when that bladder's full, you begin to really need the toilet. So that's the job of the kidneys and things like that. So now if we go back and have a look at our liver, if we go back to we'll do the function first, seeing that was most people think that the job of the thing is to remove toxins from the body, the main job, which is absolutely correct. So, oh dear, really lost this one. So yeah, the job of the liver is mainly to remove any toxins from the blood. So if you do eat anything which is a bit poisonous to your body, your liver can remove it. It can also regenerate blood as well. So it can make things and make other hormones and stuff which are needed in other places. So let's go and have a look at where people think it is. Got some good response. Yeah, that's good. That's a good thing. So your liver's found roughly here, sort of slightly under your rib cage, on that top, on your right hand side of your stomach. And that's its main resting place. Yeah, and that's all of the main organs that are found in your torso area of your body. So if I'll stop sharing the screen.
Great, thank you, Sian. So, moving away from organs, we're now going to be looking at the bones in the body, and for that we've got Grace, who is going to be talking to us with Chaos's resident skeleton, Boris.
Yes, hello. So as Sam's just said, my name is Grace, and this is Boris. He is Chaos's friendly skeleton. So he is the most qualified Chaos demonstrator to tell us all about the bones in your body. So I wanted to start off today by asking you guys a question. So the question that I want to ask you, if I share my screen, you should be able to see a Menti poll, which asks you how many bones are there in the human body. I've got you 4 options. So you can choose from 452, 10,000 bones, 206 bones, or this is quite clearly a trick question because there's just one bone and you're made of solid bone. Whilst we're going on to that, I am going to talk very briefly about why it is that we have a skeleton in the first place, because Sian's just shown us that we have lots of organs that seem to have the whole function of the body thing kind of taken care of. So what's the point of this guy? Sian mentioned the ribcage already for protecting your various different organs, your vital organs in your chest. But if you imagine what your body would be like if you didn't have a skeleton, you would just be kind of a strange puddle on the floor, and that would mean that you wouldn't be able to move and you wouldn't be able to stand up. You can see here that we've got a little video of Boris, and I'm showing you here his knee joint. So one of the things that skeleton's really useful for is helping you to move. So if we play that video again now, then what we should be able to see is that Boris's knee is a bit twisted. Oh, it's just restarted. That was bizarre, but let's keep going. So you can see this is Boris, looking very dashing in the landing of my house. And as you move down, we can see that he's got various different joints in his body. So I'm moving down to the knee joint now, which you can see is a little bit twisted, but I'll untwist it in a second. And then we should be able to see that it's actually a hinge joint, not a hinge. That's a very silly word. So you can see that it operates like a hinge on a door. So in that way, your bones are helping you to move around. But that's not the only kind of joint that you can have in your body. Another kind of joint is a ball and socket, which I'm showing you here because this is Boris's hip. So you can see that the end of his femur, the long bone at the top of his leg, has got a rounded end, and it fits into a cup-shaped joint on his pelvis. So those are Boris's joints, and now that we've had a look at those, we can have a look back at our mentipole. If Sam, you could put that up again. Wonderful. So it looks like we've got a majority for 206 bones, which is indeed the correct answer. We have 3 votes for 10,000, which surprises me, and 2 for just the 1 bone. But actually, the fact is that you don't just have 206 bones throughout the whole of your life. If we have a look very briefly, removing Boris's hat, at his skull, which admittedly you can't see very well, but that's okay, he's actually got 1 bone on his skull, which kind of acts as a protective helmet around his brain. But when you're born, the plates of bone on your skull are actually not fused together. So babies have a thing called a fontanelle on the top of their heads, which looks a little bit strange because you can kind of see it pulsing. But as they grow, and their heads, as they grow and they mature, their bones actually fuse together. So babies are born with about 300 bones, which is quite surprising when it's used to 206 over the course of their lifetimes. So I will now stop sharing my screen for a second. So hopefully be able to see Boris better. And then I think we'll talk a little bit about why it is that bones are protected. What is it about bones that means that they can protect our internal organs? So the skull obviously protects your head, protects your brain, but we also have things like the rib cage, which do protect your vital organs in your chest. Now bones are made of a protein framework, and inside of that you have calcium phosphate. Most you might know that calcium is quite hard, and that means that your bones are also hard. But bones are also quite brittle sometimes, particularly as you get older, so you can break your bones, and some of you might very well have done that. So now I'm going to ask you a second question. So I'm going to share my screen again, so that then you guys should hopefully, in a second, be able to see a second question. There we go. So I'm going to ask you what the most commonly broken bone is. I'm afraid it's coming up in Spanish on my laptop because I have an attachment which does that. So the most commonly broken bone. We have the humerus, which you can see here on Boris, this is upper arm. We have the clavicle, which is the collarbone, so attached to the upper arm. And then we also have the femur, which we've already talked about as being the upper leg bone. And the stapes, which is a bone in your inner ear. What do you think? So I'll give you a few minutes to answer that. So you just got a vote in for stapes, actually, which is quite interesting because it's a bone inside of your ear. Now you might not have thought that you would have bones inside of your ear, but they actually help you to hear. So it looks like humerus has done very well as the most popular, but actually it's not the most commonly broken bone. That is in fact the clavicle. So you can see with Boris's tie that the clavicle is just here. And it's a bone which is in quite a prominent position. So when people have car crashes or sporting accidents, then often they do manage to break that bone. The other bones that I put into the options there, the femur, is the longest bone in the human body normally. And the stapes is actually the tiniest bone in the human body. So it's about 3 to 5 millimeters by about 2 millimeters. So it's very, very small and deep because you wouldn't want large bones inside of your ear. The humerus I put in there mostly because it is the funny bone. When people talk about, you have a funny bone, they call it the humerus, and it's supposed to be funny because it has humor in the name. So, 1 second. We'll also just have a very quick look at Boris's hands, because whilst you've seen that there are 206 bones in a human body, it's surprising that actually there are 27 bones in each hand and 26 in each foot. So that's, I think, just over 100 bones of your 206 that belong in your feet and your hands, which is remarkable. So each of Boris's fingers is made of 3 separate bones. And if you look at your own fingers, you can see that they bend. They have 2 joints in them and they bend into 3 sections. So that makes sense with your 3 bones. You then, I think, have 5 in your palm and 8 in your carpal, which is your wrist. So actually, the more bones that you have in a small area, the more bones, the more joints, and the more muscles, the more flexible the various different bits of your body are. And that means that your hands and your feet, where you have your digits, are actually very dexterous. So if you think about that compared to, say, a dog's paw, that's kind of why we can move around quite as well as we can. So I think that's more or less all that I wanted to say about Boris today. Obviously, we're very happy to take any of your questions, and we hope that you like Boris's very fancy new tie. I'm going to hand back over to Sam now.
Great. Thank you, Grace. Always good to see Boris. I'm going to bring in everyone that we've had talk today and some other Cambridge scientists as well, who are going to be answering some of the questions that you guys have submitted on the Google form. Great. So, starting off, let's go back to talking about plants earlier. We started out with a question for Bryony, and that was which kind of flower has the most individual flowers in it?
Oh, that's a great question, but I'm afraid it's one I don't know the answer to. So most of the flowers that have this kind of composite flower structure, they're in a really big family called the Asteraceae. That's the daisy family. And so within that family, you have some very, very large flowers like sunflowers, and they typically have hundreds of little tiny flowers in the center and lots around the outside. But I don't know if anyone's actually done like a comprehensive count to determine which flower has the most. And it will also vary a little bit between flowers. So within kind of the same species, you might find that some what we call them a capitulum. So one of those flower heads with like one daisy with hundreds of flowers is called a capitulum. And so each capitulum might be slightly different in size. So even in one plant, you might have some capitula that have slightly more tiny flowers in than others.
Okay, great. And then an additional question we got asked about plants were, why are most plants green? I don't know whether Aaron, whether you wanted to take this question.
Yeah, sure. So most plants are green because they contain a pigment called chlorophyll. So this is the thing that allows plants to actually harvest the light energy from the sun and in order to make food for themselves. So what happens is that this chlorophyll actually absorbs most of the color, most colors in the color spectrum, except for green. And what happens is that green actually reflected off the leaf into our eyes, and that's why we see that plants look green.
Okay, great. And then one final question that I think will kind of link different parts of the talk together is, why don't plants have bones, and do they have organs? I don't know who wants to take that question. It's a really good question. Whoever's asked that.
Yeah. I can take that. So plants don't have bones, but you will notice that plants can still stand up straight, and so that's because they have different ways of standing up straight. And one of the things that they have is they have a substance called lignin, and lignin is a very, very tough, very waterproof chemical that is in a lot of plant cells, particularly in some cells called xylem, which are the tubes that go all the way up to the plant. And so this really tough what's a polymer? It's a special chemical. It plays a role in helping plants to stand up straight. Also, another thing that helps plants stand up straight is water. So plant cells have a lot of water in them, and that creates a lot of pressure. And so that pressure allows the plants to stand up straight. That's why if you don't water your plants, they get very wilted and they go floppy, because the cells don't have enough water in them. And they become, it's kind of like you've let the air out of the balloon. So the balloon doesn't have enough air in it, it goes kind of floppy, so there's no force pushing it out. As for organs, they do have organs. So flowers are organs, and leaves are organs, and roots are organs. So an organ is just a biological structure that has an important function. And so plants do have lots of them. They're just really kind of different from the ones that we have.
Okay, great. And then continuing with the theme of bones, we got another question about bones, and that was, if babies are born with more bones than 206, what age do they change to 206 bones?
I think I know this one. So in babies, the reason that they have more bones mostly is that the bones of their skull, so in an adult, your skull is all fused together and it's one big bone. Whereas in babies, it's lots of different bones, so that the head is more flexible. So during childbirth, the head can get out, and those slowly fuse over the first 1 to 2 years of the baby's life.
Okay, great. And then a question that I think will have come from the organs part of the talk was, is acid in the stomach dangerous for us?
No. Otherwise, what would be a bit of bad design if we had something inside of us permanently which was damaged us. No, your lining of your stomach has lots of cells which are perfectly designed to keep that acid and withstand the pH, so it can't do any damage to you.
I can also just add to that. Yeah, so normally then that would all be fine, but you can have then problems with your stomach where the acid does get through to the cells, and that's when you get stomach ulcers. So stomach ulcers is when your natural barriers against the acid have gone wrong somehow, and the acid can become a bit damaging.
Okay, and we've had a couple more questions about bones, including why does it hurt when bones break? Is there anyone that wants to take that question?
I can do this one again. Pain is sensed by nerves in your body, and you have nerves going all over the place. So your bone, in the bone themselves, you don't really have nerves or many nerves. You have some in a coating over your bone called the periosteum, but there's still not that much. Most of the pain actually comes from when the bone breaks, and then those bits of bone are pushing against other structures in the area. So like the muscles around the bone, which have a lot more nerves in them. So that's where a lot of the pain comes from.
Okay, great. I think that answers pretty much all of the questions we got asked or have been submitted to our Google form. We've got one final one that's just come in that I think's very interesting, and that's can you damage the bone in your ear? And I think that's a great question. And yes, you can damage and injure those bones. They are at risk, and sometimes people do need operations to fix and repair those bones. Great. So I'd like to thank everyone that we've had on to speak today and setting some time aside to film or demonstrate for us. I'd also like to thank the rest of the Chaos Committee for helping put together these great events, and everyone who's watched today. It'd be very helpful for everyone who's watched to give us some feedback. We have a feedback form that should be in the description of the video. It'd be very helpful if everyone could fill it out. And finally, I'd like to thank MathWorks, who sponsored the event today. I've made it so that we can run and put on these virtual events for everyone. Great. Thank you everyone for watching.